Hi Manatee, it's Mrs. Kublank, and it is story time for me this week to share one of my favorite Christmas stories, and it's called The Polar Express. And I'm gonna need some props today. I've got a bell and I've got a whistle. And if you could imagine being on a large Polar Express train today, that would be wonderful. Use your imagination. Here we go, The Polar Express, written and illustrated by Chris Van Allsburg. And this has received a Caldecott Award for its amazing pictures. On Christmas Eve, many years ago, I lay quietly in my bed. I did not rustle the sheets. I breathed slowly and silently. I was listening for a sound a friend had told me I'd never hear, the ringing bells of Santa's sleigh. "There is no Santa," my friend insisted, but I knew they were wrong. Late that night, I did hear sounds, though not of ringing bells. From outside came the sounds of hissing steam and squeaking metal. I looked through my window and saw a man standing perfectly still in front of my house. It was wrapped in an apron of steam. Snowflakes fell lightly around it. A conductor stood at the open door of one of the cars. He took a large pocket watch from his vest, and then he looked up at my window. I put on my slippers and robe, and I tiptoed downstairs and out the door. "All aboard!" the conductor cried out. I ran up to him. "Well," he said, "are you coming?" "Where?" I asked. "Why, to the North Pole, of course. This is the Polar Express." I took his outstretched hand and he pulled me on board. The train was filled with other children, all in their pajamas and nightgowns. We sang Christmas carols and ate candy with nugget Santas and as white as snow. We drank hot cocoa as thick and rich as melted chocolate bars. Outside, the lights of towns and villages flickered in the distance as the Polar Express raced northward. Soon there were no more lights to be seen. We traveled through cold, dark forests where lean wolves roamed and white-tailed rabbits hid in the forest as we thundered through. We climbed mountains so high it seemed as if we would scrape the moon. But the Polar Express never slowed down. Faster and faster we ran along, rolling over peaks and through valleys like a car on a roller coaster. Can you see it way up here, the train? The mountains turned into hills and the hills turned to snow-covered plains. We crossed a barren desert of ice called the Great Polar Ice Cap. Lights appeared in the distance. They looked like the lights of a strange ocean liner sailing on a frozen sea. "There," said the conductor, "there is the North Pole." The North Pole was a huge city, standing alone at the top of the world, filled with factories where every Christmas toy was made. At first, we saw no elves. "There, they are gathering at the center of the city," the conductor told us. "That's where Santa will give the first gift of Christmas." "Who receives the first gift?" we all asked. The conductor answered, "He will choose one of you." "Look!" shouted one of the children. "The elves!" Outside we saw hundreds of elves. As our train drew closer to the center of the North Pole, we slowed to a crawl. So crowded were the streets with Santa's helpers. When the Polar Express could go no farther, we stopped and the conductor led us outside. We pressed through the crowds to the edge of a large open circle. In front of us stood Santa's sleigh. The reindeer were excited. They pranced and paced, ringing the silver bells that hung from their harnesses. It was a magical sound, like nothing I'd ever heard. Across the circle, the elves moved apart. and Santa Claus appeared. The elves cheered wildly. He marched over to us and said, pointing to me, "Let's have this fellow here." He jumped into his sleigh, and the conductor, he handed me up. I sat on Santa's knee, and he asked me, "Now, what would you like for Christmas?" I knew I could have my gift any gift that I could ever imagine. But the thing I wanted the most was not inside Santa's big bag. What I wanted more than anything was one silver bell. One silver bell from Santa's sleigh. When I asked Santa, he smiled, and then he gave me a hug and told an elf to cut a bell from the reindeer's harness. The elf tossed it up to Santa. He stood holding the bell high above him, and he called out, "The first gift of Christmas." A clock struck midnight as the elves roared their approval. Santa handed a bell to me, and I put it in my bathrobe pocket. The conductor helped me down from the sleigh. Santa shouted out the reindeers' names and cracked his whip. His team charged forward and climbed into the air. Santa circled once above us, and then he disappeared into the cold, dark, polar sky. As soon as we were back inside the Polar Express, the other children asked to see the bell. I reached inside my pocket, but the only thing I felt was a hole in my pocket. I had lost the silver bell from Santa's sleigh. "Let's hurry outside and look for it," one of the children said. But the train gave a sudden lurch and started moving. We were on our way home. It broke my heart to lose the bell. When the train reached my house, I sadly left the other children. I stood at my doorway and waved goodbye. The conductor said something from the moving train, but I couldn't hear him. "What?" I yelled out. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "Merry Christmas!" The Polar Express let out a loud blast from its whistle, and it sped away. On Christmas morning, my little sister Sarah and I opened up all our presents. When it looked as if everything had been unwrapped, Sarah found one last small box behind the tree. It had my name on it. Inside, it was the silver bell. There was a note. "Found this on the seat of my sleigh. Fix that hole in your pocket. Signed, Mr. C." I wonder who Mr. C is. I shook the bell, and it made the most beautiful sound my sister and I had ever heard. But my mother said, "Oh, that's too bad." "Yes, it's broken," said my father. When I had shaken the bell, my parents had not heard the sound. At one time, most of my friends could hear the bell, but as years passed, it fell silent for all of them. Even Sarah found one Christmas that she could no longer hear its sweet sound. Though I've grown old, the bell still rings for me, as it does for all who truly believe. I hope you enjoyed that story, boys and girls. It is one of my Christmas favorites. And for those of you, I hope that you can still hear the ringing bells of Santa's sleigh, believing in the magic of Christmas, just like I do. Merry Christmas.